In a prior video, we looked at father-son duos who both went on to conquer the world of wrestling. Names like Dusty and Cody Rhodes, Cowboy Bob and Randy Orton, or Vince and Shane McMahon. But one thing none of these pairs were able to do was win the same title. No, that accolade is reserved for a very select group. So let's look at those father and son duos who both did manage to win the same belt, starting with two men who both became Intercontinental Champion, Mr. Perfect and Curtis Axel. Yes, Mr. Perfect is easily one of the greatest Intercontinental Champions of all time. And that's because, during his peak years in the WWF during the Golden Era, he was able to consistently be one of the best wrestlers on the roster. Yes, Hennig was able to absolutely kill it every time he stepped between the ropes during this period. Hell, it was his run with the IC strap in 1990 and 1991 that helped establish it as the true workhorse prize of the promotion. Just look at some of the great bouts he had at this point against the likes of the Texas Tornado, the British Bulldog, and Bret Hitman Hart. But this wouldn't be the only time someone in the Hennig family held that belt, because decades later, in 2013, his son Joe Hennig would do the same thing. Of course, this was during the period where Joe was going by the name of Curtis Axel, though. How would Curtis fare as IC champion? Well, not as good as his father did, unfortunately. But part of the reason for that was because this was the lengthy spell where the secondary prize had been so devalued that few fans cared about it as much as they once did. So instead of having great matches, Joe Hennig's run would be mostly characterized by short, raw, mid-card bouts, which failed to make much of an impression. But even if this was the case, none of that could take away from the fact that he was the Intercontinental Champion, and this puts him and his father in a very special club indeed. But the Hennigs aren't the only family who are part of this particular club. No, there is another notable father-son duo in WWE's history who have both been Intercontinental Champion. Who are they? Why, they are our next subjects, Rikishi and Jay Uso. Of course, many fans remember Rikishi's run with the WWF during the Attitude Era, as it was there he took himself from what was effectively the role of a comedy act to semi-main event force in record time. And considering this was the era where the main event scene was filled with names like The Rock, Triple H, Mick Foley, The Undertaker, and Stone Cold Steve Austin, just to name a few, that's quite an achievement. Sure, he might never have won the big one, but he did get to earn some singles gold in May of 2000, when on an episode of SmackDown, he was able to beat Chris Benoit to become IC champion for the first and only time. And while this wasn't quite the peak years of the secondary belt, Rikishi was enough of a star back then that him holding it kept it elevated to a decent level. Hell, back then it still felt like a workhorse prize that a wrestler could aspire to have for themselves. Unfortunately though, not long after he dropped the title to Val Venus, the legacy of the once mighty piece of hardware would begin to wither away, as it would lose its aura in many ways. That was, until 2022, the point Gunther won it and made it relevant all over again during his record 666-day run. But it's not Gunther who would enter the history books by becoming part of a father-son duo to call themselves IC champ. No, that honor would instead go to Jay Uso, as he'd end up taking the title from Braun Breaker on the September 23, 2024 episode of Raw to do what his dad had done so many years before. How would fans react to main event Jay Uso becoming the champ? Very well, as it happened, because by this point, he'd managed to get himself hugely over as a single star, much like his dad did back in the day. In fact, again, like his dad, you could argue Jay was never initially intended to reach such a height. But when live crowds told WWE what they wanted, the company would listen to them. That said, for as big of an achievement as this is for the Anoa'i family members, it's not the only time Rikishi and Jay Uso both won the same title, as they did the exact same thing with the WWE Tag Team titles too. That's right, we all know that alongside his twin brother Jimmy, Jay Uso was an MVP of the tag team division in WWE for the entirety of the 2010s and beyond. Seriously, during a time when the division was otherwise dead, you could always count on the Usos to deliver a great tag match in the mid-card, usually against teams like the New Day or The Bar. Understandably then, both Jimmy and Jay would hold gold around their waists many times. with them being 8-time tag team champions overall. It didn't matter if it was the WWE Tag Team title or the World Tag Team titles. If you go back through the PG era of WWE, there's a good chance that at any given moment, the Sons of Rikishi were in possession of at least one set of gold. But then, that was all in the family for them, because years before they'd ever even laced up their boots for the first time, their dad was showing them how it would be done by becoming a World Tag Team Champion himself on 2 separate occasions. Who would his partners be at this time? Well, the first would be Samu, Rikishi's teammate back when he was going by the moniker of Fatu, one half of the Head Shrinkers. Yes, as far back as the crossover period between the Golden Era and the New Generation Era, Rikishi was making his presence felt in WWE. And that presence would still be felt years later once the Attitude Era came around. Because when he wasn't winning singles gold in the form of the IC strap, he was teaming with Rico to become a World Tag Team Champion as well. In fact, he'd even win the WWE Tag Team titles at one point with his Too Cool stablemate, Scotty 2 Hotty. But as that particular lineage of belt never lasted long enough to be won by the Usos, we won't include it as a valid example here. No, instead, we'll move on to another father-son duo from the famed Anoa'i family, who can also both call themselves former World Tag Team Champions. Who are we talking about here? Why, Rocky Johnson and The Rock, of course. Now, we're sure you're all aware of Rocky Johnson, as aside from being the father of The Rock, he was also a very accomplished wrestler in his own right. And this was true no matter what territory he worked in throughout his career, whether it be California, the Carolinas, or even his native Canada. That said, for as much success as he had all over North America, Soulman's biggest success was found in WWF, as it was there, right as the Golden Era was kicking off in December of 1983, that he and his partner, Tony Atlas, would defeat the Wild Samoans to become the World Tag Team Champions. And then, years later, when his son Dwayne came of age and joined WWF under the moniker of Rocky Maivia, he'd find himself holding the exact same belts. Sure, this might seem like a surprising stat to some, particularly as The Rock was never a tag team specialist like his dad. No, his specialty was always as a force of nature in the singles division, with this being exactly why he'd become a 10-time world champion before all was said and done. From time to time though, whenever he was called upon to do so, the future Hollywood star would step into the tag division as well for a while, most notable with his Rock and Sock connection partner, Mick Foley, the very man he won his first 3 sets of duos gold with. Aside from that, well, it would be less of a case of Dwayne Johnson finding a teammate he could gel with, and more of a case of his trying to coexist with a rival as they fell into becoming champs together. Yes, it's a story wrestling has revisited over the years, and it's what gave us 2 more tag title runs for the Great One, with The Undertaker and Chris Jericho. Obviously though, it will be his time with Mankind that he's most fondly remembered by most fans. And it's this time which very well may have made his father the proudest of all, because for both Rocky and Dwayne to say they held the same belt decades apart, that's a special thing that must have made their bond all the stronger. Of course, even after talking about the People's Champion and the Usos, we're still not done with current WWE superstars who won the same tag team titles that their dads once did. No, the exact same thing could be said about our next entry, current top dog in the WWE, Roman Reigns, and his father, Sika. And what's more, this is a 2-for-1 entry, because there was another son of Sika who became World Tag Team Champion during his run too. The one, the only, Rosie. Yes, as we mentioned a moment ago, when Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas became Tag Team Champions back in 1983, they had to beat the Wild Samoans in order to do so. And the Wild Samoans were made up of Afa and Sika, 2 of the elders of the Anoa'i family. And that wasn't the only time Afa and Sika would hold tag team gold in WWF either. No, over the course of their run there, they'd win these straps on 3 separate occasions. Needless to say then, this left their children with a lot to live up to once they finally hit the ring themselves. But while that pressure would have caused many lesser men to crumble, in the end it only motivated the oldest son of Sika, Rosie, to reach the top himself after he signed with Vince McMahon in the 2000s. That's right, after a run as one half of 3 Minute Warning saw him fail to conquer the tag team division in WWE, Rosie would finally get things right on his next attempt when, in May of 2005, he and his then tag team partner, the Hurricane, won the gold. Then, years later, in 2012, Rosie's brother, Roman Reigns, would make his main roster debut, with him making an instant splash as one-third of The Shield. Yes, The Shield would waste no time in making WWE their own personal playground back during the early 2010s. And this was what led to two of its members, Roman and Seth Rollins, becoming tag team champions in short order. So, because of that, Sika was able to say that both of his sons were able to match his achievements, an ever rarer feat in the wrestling industry. But let's move away from the tag team titles for a moment and back over to singles gold, as it's there we find our next father-son duo. Which one are we talking about here? Who else but Dusty and Dustin Rhodes, two men who have both been United States champion. That's right. While much has been made in recent years of Cody Rhodes winning the belt his father never did, the American Dream's other son, Dustin, did share a title with him, and that title would be won over in World Championship Wrestling. Of course, it wasn't known as WCW back when Dusty was the US champion, though. No, back then it was known as Jim Crockett Promotions, one of the biggest territories in North America, and a kind of homeback of sorts for the National Wrestling Alliance by the time the late 80s came around. So, with Dusty being a stalwart of Jim Crockett by then, and with him being a well-established star and former world champion already, it made all the sense in the world for him to win the United States strap from Lex Luger at 1987's Starrcade. After all, this was a period when that belt still had a high status in fans' eyes, and someone on the level of the son of a blummer holding it would only help it keep it at that level, all while giving him something important to do on the show. Sadly for Dusty, though, his lone run with this particular piece of hardware would be cut short when he was stripped of it after kayfabe attacking Jim Crockett, and with him heading over to WWF not long after that, there wouldn't be any further opportunity for him to regain it again. One member of the Rhodes family who would get a chance to win it in future, though, would be Dustin Rhodes, someone who first started rising up the ranks of WCW during the late 80s and early 90s. Obviously then, it was only going to be a matter of time until the Natural replicated his dad's success and actually won the US belt himself, with this being something he'd do in January of 1993 after winning a tournament for it following Rick Rude's vacancy. And that technically wouldn't be the only time Dustin could call himself United States champion either. No, as a result of his rematch with Rude ending with a screwy finish and the belt being vacated once more, once he beat the Ravishing One clean in the subsequent rematch, this would technically mark his second spell with it. Clearly then, this has made the Natural stamp on the title's lineage very strong, arguably even stronger than his father's. And we've absolutely no doubt in our minds that this is something which would have made Dusty proud, as what father doesn't want to see their children succeed in a greater way than even they did? In fact, we could probably say the same things about Dusty's greatest rival, Ric Flair, as he and his son David can also both say that during the course of their respective careers, they became United States champion. Yet, so highly prized was the secondary strap during the territory era, even the best wrestler in the world wanted to win it. And that was why, throughout the 70s, Ric Flair would make it his goal to hold the US title around his waist. Sure, it would take him a while to get there, until 1977 in fact. But once he won it, his career would skyrocket to new heights. Heights which saw him become a 6-time champion before all was said and done, as well as a 16-time plus world champion. Seriously, you can make an argument that of all the people to ever hold the United States Championship, Slick Rick is the best there is. Unfortunately though, the same thing could not be said about his son, because while he would win the same belt himself in 1999, David Flair wasn't exactly on the level of his dad. Not that this meant he wouldn't give it his best shot after taking it home in July of that year, of course. But even if he was doing this, it was simply impossible for him to be the next Nature Boy. And maybe that's why his run would be so short then, with it only lasting for 35 days before he dropped it to Chris Benoit. To be honest though, it's probably for the best that David did lose the gold at that point, because pretty soon after, WCW would enter the worst period in 2000. So bad was it, even if Ric Flair had stepped up to the plate to win his 7th US title here, it likely would have done nothing to turn things around. Was this a sad way for WCW to go out? Sure, but at least it wouldn't be the end of that particular belt, as it would continue to live on in WWE. And this meant its history would continue to be told right up to the present day, with a key part of that history being that both Ric Flair and David Flair held it at different points, giving them entry into a very select club. But what of another belt which moved over from WCW to WWE during the invasion? We're talking about the Cruiserweight title. Did that one have any shared lineage between a father and a son? Why, yes it did. And those two people are our next subjects as it happens: Chavo Guerrero Sr. and Chavo Guerrero Jr. What's interesting about this entry, however, is that there weren't decades which separated the two's run with the same belt. No, back during the heyday of Chavo Guerrero Sr., or Chavo Classic as he'd later come to be known as in WWE, the Cruiserweight title wasn't even a thing. Come 2004 though, he would have found himself getting a job in the WWE. And the reason he got this job then was because his son, Chavo Jr., was a WWE superstar during the mid-2000s and needed his father to come in and guide him towards success. Would this work out for the young Guerrero's son? Yes, it would, and very well, because with his father in his corner, he was able to win the WWE Cruiserweight title on 2 separate occasions, with these marking his 3rd and 4th reigns with that particular belt overall, after he'd won it twice back when it was a prize contested over in WCW. That said, it wouldn't just be Chavo Jr. winning the Cruiserweight title in 2004. No, Chavo Classic would also get in on the fun too, when in May of that year, he actually beat his son to win the gold for himself. Needless to say then, this caused some friction between the pair. Friction which led to Chavo Jr. accusing his dad of trying to steal his spotlight. Yes, it was quite an angle for mid-2000s SmackDown, and it also marks a rare time where a father and son held the same singles belt in such close proximity to one another. And we use the caveat of singles belt here because if we head back over to the tag team division for a second, we will find another recent example of a father and son becoming tag team champions together. SmackDown tag team champions more specifically. Yes, it's time for us to talk about Rey and Dominic Mysterio. Of course, Rey Mysterio has been no stranger to tag team gold over the years. Hell, back during the days of the SmackDown 6 on Ruthless Aggression era SmackDown, he'd regularly put on tag team clinics with his partner Edge, with this leading to them becoming the Blue Brand's tag team champions on multiple different occasions. And as it happened, it was also around this time that his son Dominic first appeared on WWE TV, famously as a prize to be won during the inaugural Custody of Dominic Mysterio ladder match. Come 2019 though, Dom would no longer be a mere accessory to a feud. No, by that point he was a fully grown man and ready to step into the ring himself. And so it was that at this point he would rejoin WWE, now as an active performer. And as his father was working there again by then, it made all the sense in the world for the two to be paired up, as it was felt this would be the best way to help Dominic learn on the job. Sure, this wouldn't lead to fans taking to the young rookie much during those early days, as many saw him as another son of a famous father who didn't have much aptitude for the ring at this time. But that didn't stop Dominic from giving it his all, and this would all lead to him and Rey challenging Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode for the SmackDown Tag Team titles at May 2021's WrestleMania Backlash, and winning. Yes, for the first time in WWE history, a father and son were in possession of tag team gold together. And this obviously meant the world to both Rey and Dominic. Sure, this still wouldn't do much to get Dom over with fans, but that wouldn't be a problem forever, because not long after they dropped the titles a couple of months later, Dom would begin being courted by Rhea Ripley, and this would eventually lead to him turning heel on his dad and joining the Judgment Day, in the process becoming Dirty Dom, the biggest heel in all of WWE for a while. Would he have gotten to this point if he'd never won the tag team gold with his father? Who knows? But one thing is for sure, winning the same world tag team title as his dad didn't lead to the same amount of success for one of our next subjects, Ted DiBiase Jr., the son of none other than the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Now, if you were a fan of Golden Era WWF, then you'll no doubt be very familiar with the Million Dollar Man, as he was one of the most memorable characters of that era, a dastardly heel that was reportedly based on Vince McMahon himself. So much so that Vince had often said behind the scenes if he was to play any character at the time, this would be the one he'd play. But while this never really led to DiBiase winning a lot of singles gold in the WWF, outside of that one Phantom run with the world title, of course, or his time spent with the unsanctioned Million Dollar title, it did lead to a lot of success for him in the tag team division. Yes, it was after partnering with Erwin R. Shyster in 1992 to form Money Inc. that Ted would finally get some sanctioned gold around his waist in the form of the World Tag Team titles. In fact, this would happen for him on 3 separate occasions. Sadly though, by the time the mid-90s came around, any hopes of the Million Dollar Man having a 4th run on top of the tag team division would be gone, as it was at this point that an accumulation of injuries finally forced him to hang up his boots once and for all and take up a new career as a manager. Not that this would be the end of the DiBiase family stepping inside of a WWE ring to wrestle, however. No, far from it, as almost 2 decades later, in 2008, Ted DiBiase Jr. would make his main roster debut in the WWE. And like his father had previously, he'd find success in the tag team division too, when he began teaming up with another second-generation star in Cody Rhodes. Back then, Cody wasn't the star he is today though. No, like with DiBiase Jr., he was still very much getting started. And that's why it was such a big deal for them both when, at June 29th's Night of Champions pay-per-view that year, they officially became World Tag Team Champions together when the American Nightmare turned on his former partner, Hardcore Holly. And this wouldn't be their only run with those particular belts either. Now, by the time all was said and done, Rhodes and DiBiase would be 2-time World Tag Team Champions, with this no doubt making the Million Dollar Man proud as he watched on from home, safe in the knowledge that his son had been able to achieve some of the same success as him, at least for a little while. Sure, things wouldn't go great for Ted DiBiase Jr. after this. But then, he's not alone in meeting that fate, as the same thing would happen for one of our next subjects, David Hart Smith, when he eventually lost the World Tag Team title he was once in possession of, the very same belt his father, the British Bulldog, had won years prior. That's right, while Davey Boy Smith's most famous WWF moment is probably him winning the Intercontinental title at Wembley Stadium from his brother-in-law Bret Hart in 1992, that was far from the only run he had with a belt in the WWF. No, he was also a multiple-time World Tag Team Champion, too. Hell, these runs were spread out across different eras, with his first with the Dynamite Kid coming during the Golden Era, and his second with Owen Hart coming during the New Generation Era. Once that run with Owen was over though, there would be no more opportunities for the Bulldog to become a tag champion in the WWF. No, the next time someone in his family had such an opportunity, it would be his son David Hart Smith during the mid to late 2000s. Who would Bulldog Jr.'s partner be during this endeavor? Well, that would be his cousin and fellow Hart family member, Tyson Kidd. And together, then going by the name of the Hart Dynasty, all while being managed down to the ring by Kidd's wife, Natalia Neidhart, they'd go on to not only challenge for those same World Tag Team titles Davey Boy Smith had won years prior, but actually win them when they beat Showmiz for the honor on the April 26, 2010 episode of Raw. Yes, like with others we've looked at today, this victory would mean a father and son shared the same titles years apart. But that wouldn't be the only reason such a win was historically significant. No, this one would also mark the last reign in the lineage of those original tag team titles, before they were swallowed up and merged with the WWE tag team titles. Yes, David Hart Smith could now say that he'd honored his dad's legacy, and that puts him in the same category as everyone else we've looked at today, as they can all say the same thing.